Hi Rick, thank you very much for talking with me today.
Oh, it's really a pleasure.
Rick, you've been our regional representative for UNHCR since March 2007, overseeing all the refugee protection issues in the 16 different countries that are under your care. I want to talk a bit later about your accomplishments made across the region under your guidance, but let's first begin with the formidable challenges you've faced in Australia, advocating for the protection and durable solutions for asylum seekers and refugees here. Can you describe the political climate on refugees and asylum seekers in Australia when you began your posting, and how were you feeling when you first arrived in the Canberra office?
Well, when I first arrived here, I was delighted as a Kiwi to be able to work and live in a region that I call home. So for that personal reasons, it was really a pleasure and a privilege to be back at home in the region and amongst people that I understood. And the challenges at the end of 2007 during that period was really the end of a long period of difficult times for asylum seekers and refugees with the Pacific solution. And not long after I arrived, towards the end of 2007 and early 2008, those offshore processing arrangements were put to an end and the camps were closed. So we were entering what we regarded as a very positive new period of refugee protection in Australia.
And how has the climate changed over the past 7 years?
These things tend to be cyclic. We've seen ups and downs for various periods between 2007 and 2013, where we are today. We've seen some very positive moments. We've seen, on the one hand, some very good developments on regional cooperation in Southeast Asia. We've seen a number of very positive developments here in Australia at various moments. The faster moving of people out of detention, particularly children being moved from detention into the community at rapid levels. And we've seen an increased and improved refugee status determination system in Australia at various moments. But I think it's fair to say also that over the past 12 to 18 months we've seen a very sharp deterioration in the overall protection environment here.
So let's talk about the various attempts by Australia to restart offshore transfer and processing arrangements in the region, from the ultimately unsuccessful Malaysia solution to the newly reopened Nauru and Manus Island centres. Are you disappointed with the return to these policies?
We've always had difficulties with the offshore processing arrangements in the Pacific for two basic reasons. One is we don't think that they lend much to what we think should be the fundamental goal, and that is improving and developing a greater level of regional cooperation for protecting refugees, particularly with Australia's neighbours to the north. That requires careful, incremental investment over a long period of time to raise the standard of protection in those countries, precisely to prevent people from taking these dangerous journeys towards Australia. So for us, the movement back to the Pacific Island options is more in the nature of deflecting responsibilities rather than consolidating and sharing responsibilities for refugee protection. So to that extent, we've got some difficulties. The second area where we have long-standing problems with the offshore arrangements in the Pacific Island states is that they are difficult, remote locations to do this properly, but we understand that it is extremely difficult to do it effectively and fairly and properly in these places, and our reports over long periods of time have borne out how deeply challenging it is to protect people properly.
Did you foresee the toughening of Australia's asylum seeking policies?
We did. In 2010, the asylum seeker arrivals by boat were going up quite sharply, and in 2011, the numbers started to taper off and plateau. It was at that moment that we were, in principle, prepared to support some of the suggestions around the Malaysian arrangement, because we saw that if we were not able to achieve an effective way of managing those issues at that time, then boat arrivals could increase and we could quickly find ourselves in a deteriorating protection environment, in a situation where the public support for the protection of refugees was dissipating. And that's precisely what we've seen develop over the last 18 months.
UNHCR talks a lot about regional cooperation rather than offshore processing. Can you tell me about your role in the Bali process and what your goals were in fostering regional cooperation?
Well, offshore processing is simply a movement of a physical place of processing from one jurisdiction to another. It doesn't relieve, in present circumstances, Australia of its obligations to protect people. We think it's altogether different and more positive to try to reach a level of cooperation in Southeast Asia where the overall standard of protection is raised. So with that general objective in mind in 2011 and in the year before, UNHCR was a very strong advocate and proponent for what has finally become called the Regional Cooperation Framework. And this is an effort signed up to by more than 45 states in the region to agree on a broad framework for cooperating and collaborating on these difficult issues. And the beauty of the regional framework that we were successful in promoting is that it allows a forum for all countries to raise issues that are challenging for them, and in the hope that by collaboration in a multilateral way or bilateral way they can get better results than if they were trying to do it on their own. And we still believe that it is perhaps the most optimistic and positive framework that can still be employed in the region.
Moving on now, I want to talk about some lesser known work but still valuable. Can you tell me about some projects that you've overseen that have not been in the media spotlight but that you feel have been very valuable and important?
The Pacific is a remarkable practice ground, if you like, for some of the big issues that face the international community, and particularly in the areas of climate change, displacement and natural disaster response. These are very challenged areas and communities already. Pacific Island states are already facing the consequences of rising sea levels. The more frequent, more severe extreme weather events are challenging their capacities and challenging their way of life. So the international community needs to understand better how to help these small Pacific Island states survive and adapt better to these changing physical environments. And in a modest way, UNHCR, of course, as an organisation, is very used to helping people and governments deal with forced displacement. Traditionally, our work is helping people in conflict and persecution. But with that background experience, we've got a lot, I think, that we can offer governments and their communities in trying to help manage forced displacement from natural disaster events, including climate change, in a better way. So we're very actively involved with governments in the region, including the UN humanitarian team, to try to see what we can do to improve the response of us all to help these small Pacific Island states.
So UNHCR works with many organisations to provide asylum seekers and refugees protection and assistance. How has it been working with the refugee sector in this region?
Oh, this is a marvellous refugee sector in Australia and New Zealand. It's a robust, open sector which confronts, challenges, pushes, probes, advocates in a very positive way, and I think that's the hallmark of civil society in Australia and New Zealand. You can have open, robust conversations on difficult, challenging issues. These issues are not swept under the carpet. We see the degree of interest, sometimes excessive interest, on asylum issues that are debated in the media. They're debated in the Parliament, they're debated, I dare say, at home and across the kitchen table, meals. And that's a good thing, to understand what these issues are and to make sure one has the right response. And we've been privileged, personally, over the last 6 or 7 years, to work very closely with the advocacy and refugee protection community.
So when you look back over the last 7 years, what achievements by yourself or by your team are you most proud of?
I think as a team, the regional office in Canberra has, with a very, very small group of professional, committed staff, has been able to identify and demonstrate the value of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. We are responsible for highlighting and protecting refugees, and we do that in a variety of ways, through contributing to the legislative process, through conversations and cooperation with the NGO sector, the refugee sector, and our discussions with government. So I think the national team that we have here in Canberra is truly impressive in the quality of the work that they produce and their commitment to the work. So I'm very proud to have been associated with this team for the last 6 years.
Now, there's a particular story that I'd like your thoughts on, an event that took place in 2009. An asylum seeker boat heading for New Zealand ran aground in the Torres Strait, and I understand that you actually played an instrumental role in negotiating for their protection. Can you tell me that story?
Well, some might say I can't comment on operational matters, but I think overall it was a challenging issue. It shows how complex it is to try to manage these issues, and governments that try to deal with these issues on their own with single policy responses, like pushing people back or trying to relieve themselves of responsibility without truly collaborating with other countries and other agencies such as UNHCR, will find difficulty in trying to have satisfactory outcomes. And I think what we were able to do there, as we've done on a number of other occasions, these are not issues that normally are highlighted in the media, is to show a valuable brokering role that UNHCR can play. We have the trust of asylum seekers. In that incident, the people were able to say, yes, what UNHCR is telling us about their options is accurate and acceptable, and they agreed, thank goodness, to get off the boat and put themselves in the hands of the Australians for processing here. I've got no doubt that if they had decided to continue on their boat journey towards New Zealand, they would have lost their lives. They were on a small, unprepared vessel heading across some of the most perilous oceans on the planet.
So you were able to negotiate for those asylum seekers to come to Australia rather than continue that journey?
That was part of our advice to them, and certainly our advice was reinforced by others helping in the negotiations. And at the end of the day, I think better counsel prevailed with the people on the boat, and they decided to get off that dangerous journey and to find protection in Australia, and that's indeed what happened at the end of the day. But I think the broader issue here is that's cooperation at its best, and that's the sort of multilateral, sensitive role that UNHCR is used to playing around the world, and we're happy to play that role in this region as and when required as well.
Rick, UNHCR mandates for the protection of stateless people. I understand you've actually got a personal interest in those who are stateless.
Well, I think it's not often understood that UNHCR has two hats, actually. One is for promoting and protecting refugees, and the other is to reduce the level and incidence of statelessness. And when I first arrived in Australia, in fact in 2008, my daughter was born in Australia to a diplomatic father and a mother who comes from another part of the world. And one of my first duties was to actually see whether I could get a nationality for my daughter. I think I was able to appreciate firsthand and very personally the plight of people who are stateless today. And without a nationality, you have no roots to build on. So it was really another example, a reminder for me of the human dimension to the work that we do that came right back into my own home.
So Rick, you've actually been described as someone who genuinely cares deeply about refugee protection. What does this work actually mean to you?
I think you can't do this work unless you really care deeply for the plight of people who are vulnerable. The only difference between refugees and ourselves is bad luck and bad geography often. What I bring to my work every day when I get up is a sense of service and a sense of humility, because refugees are ordinary people who overcome tremendous adversity to survive and then contribute in their host countries when they are given an opportunity. So to be able to provide whatever support we can as an individual, as an organisation, is really a privilege for me primarily.
Rick, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. Thank you very much, and good luck in Malaysia.
Thank you very much indeed. I very much enjoyed it.